venue this weekend.
Gerrard scores!
Looks for Cowie. Oh, and it's an own.
Who will win the first silverware of the season? The League Cup final, Cardiff City versus Liverpool. Sunday at 3 on BBC One and BBC One HD.
This is BBC One now. Fiona Bruce with the BBC News at 10 o'clock.
A big shake-up of the UK's border security after hundreds of thousands of ID checks weren't carried out properly. A damning report concludes the agency suffered from a series of problems. The Home Secretary says it's not good enough and must change.
The Revine report reveals a border force that suspended important checks without permission, spent millions on new technologies but chose not to use them, was led by managers who did not communicate with their staff.
She is hidden behind a report and not set out its full consequences, just as she blamed officials, just as she is hidden from the media, just as she is hidden behind spurious statistics.
We'll be looking at who's to blame. Also tonight...
I'm very sorry to say that. Because the NHS is not for sale.
An uncompromising message for the Health Secretary on his way to discuss the controversial NHS reforms. The southeast of England is declared a drought zone with a warning that hosepipe bans could follow. Bosses at Lloyds are told they won't now get £2 million in bonuses they'd been promised. And how one of the world's most feared diseases is close to being eradicated in India with help from British volunteers.
Now that India is polio-free, can the world seize this opportunity and get rid of this ancient, disabling disease for good?
And in BBC London News, no hospital closures in the capital. That's the pledge tonight from the Health Secretary. And taking the plunge, the Aquatic Centre is put through its paces ahead of the Olympics.
Good evening. The UK Border Agency is to be split in two after a new report revealed hundreds of thousands of people have been let into the country without appropriate checks. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, told the Commons that an official investigation into the relaxation of border controls last year found that 500,000 people arriving on the Eurostar, for example, weren't checked against a watch list for suspected criminals. Labour have accused the Home Secretary of failing to take responsibility for the problems. Our political editor, Nick Robinson, reports.
The UK Border Agency. It's meant to stop terrorists, criminals and illegal immigrants entering the country. But today, an official investigation found that the proper checks had not been carried out on hundreds of different occasions over several years, covering many hundreds of thousands of people.
The Vine report reveals that security checks carried out at the border have been suspended regularly and applied inconsistently since at least 2007.
In other words, the problems she was claiming started when Labour were in power. The report of the independent chief inspector of the UK Border Agency highlighted a series of failures. Overall, it criticised poor communication, poor managerial oversight and a lack of clarity. This led to the so-called Warnings Index, extra checks on people with questionable immigration status being suspended on 350 separate occasions. Fingerprint checks carried out on foreign nationals with visas were suspended on a further 480 occasions. No records were kept of how many people who should have been checked were not. Visitors to Euro Disney may not seem to be top of any risk list, but the report found that together with those on Eurostar's ski train, 500,000 people had escaped the proper border controls.
Mr. Speaker, the Revine report reveals a border force that suspended important checks without permission, spent millions on new technologies but chose not to use them, was led by managers who did not communicate with their staff, and that sent reports to ministers that were inaccurate, unbalanced, and excluded key information.
I spoke to John Vine, the author of today's report, after he'd watched the Home Secretary's statement and asked him to sum up his verdict on the Borders Agency.
Is it not fit for purpose?
I think the Border Agency has a long way to go in order to ensure that it is truly a law enforcement body which can be relied upon to ensure that it keeps the border safe.
The government is now splitting off those in uniforms who police the border, the UK Border Force, from those in suits who make and run the rules. All of this a reaction to the revelation that last summer border checks were suspended at Heathrow to avoid lengthy queues. News that led the Home Secretary to suspend the then head of the UK Border Agency, Brodie Clark, and him to resign in protest and sue the Home Office. The opposition say the government is still blaming others for its mistakes.
It is time for her to stop hiding, to take responsibility for things that have happened on her watch, for the unclear instructions from her office, for the policy decisions to downgrade our border controls.
Perhaps the biggest test of the UK's border controls will come this summer, as huge numbers head here, most to watch the Olympics, but some for reasons that ought to mean they're kept out.
Well, Nick Robinson is at Westminster for us. Nick, the report lists some serious security failures at the UK Border Agency. How worried should we be?
Well, the author of this report told me earlier, look, we had to keep this in proportion, that although, yes, there were failings, what he said was that they were often the failure to have additional controls in addition to the normal passport checks. What is a problem, I think, here is that those in the agency, ministers, those in the Home Office, simply didn't know what each thought and what each was doing. There is an argument still going on tonight about whether the Immigration Minister, Damien Green, really did know about what was being done when border controls were temporarily suspended. Some in the agency say that he did. The union representing Brodie Clark, the man who was suspended and then resigned as head of the UK Border Force, says they do, and the Labour Party are taking that up. The government insists they've nothing to apologise for. Everyone involved in this is clear, though, you cannot check everybody equally thoroughly all the time. You have to do risk-based checks, as they're called. What I'm struck by is that this is far from the first time we've had these sorts of problems. Remember, the UK Border Agency was only set up because of a series of failures, not least the failure over foreign prisoners that caused a former Home Secretary to have to resign. They got a new agency, they got a new logo, now there's yet another organisational restructuring, and all politicians can do is this, and hope things get better.
Nick Robinson, Westminster, thank you. The Health Secretary, Andrew Lansley, was heckled and jostled by a group of protesters today as he tried to enter Downing Street for a meeting about his controversial reforms of the NHS in England. Tonight, more than 650 doctors, nurses and other health professionals signed a critical letter branding today's meeting as a gathering of yes-men. Carol Walker reports.
It clearly wasn't what he was expecting. The Health Secretary walked straight into a confrontation with opponents of his NHS plans. One former union official emotional as she blocked his path.
I promise you, waiting times in the NHS have gone down. It will not go private. But I'm very sorry, because the NHS is not for sale. There's no privatisation. People will not be charged.
He made his way into Downing Street. Some of those around the table with the Prime Minister believe the plans will improve the NHS, though others had come to voice their concerns, and those who oppose the plans outright, including the Royal Colleges of Doctors, Nurses and Midwives, were not invited.
Downing Street say today's meeting is simply part of the ongoing discussions about the bill, but by leaving out so many of their critics, they've simply increased the hostility amongst many of the healthcare professionals who will be expected to implement their plans.
He keeps saying that because some GPs have got involved in clinical commissioning, that means that the majority of GPs support it. That's not true.
In some parts of England, as here in Wigan, GPs already have control over their own budgets and say their reforms to stroke services have improved results and saved money.
The key aspect of the bill is about giving leadership to the clinicians at the front line. We want that to be retained.
It's not just those brandishing the placards that are worried about greater competition and private sector involvement, but the Prime Minister wants to reassure them.
There are myths we need to bust, but I also heard how on the ground, where some of these reforms are already taking place, you're actually seeing better health outcomes, GPs doing more things for their patients, people leading healthier lives as a result of these changes. So I'm committed to the changes.
But the Labour leader accused Mr Cameron of a bunker mentality.
I say very directly to David Cameron, I hope he will listen to the doctors, the nurses, the midwives, the patients, all of whom are saying to him, drop the bill.
Andrew Lansley made light of today's confrontation.
You know, sticks and stones, etc.
He's still battling to get his bill through the House of Lords, but the government insists there's no question of abandoning its plans for the NHS now. Carol Walker, BBC News, Westminster.
The southeast of England is officially in a state of drought amid fears that water levels in reservoirs in parts of England are at lower levels than they were in 1976, when there were widespread shortages and rationing. As well as the southeast, East Anglia and the East Midlands are the worst affected areas, as Jeremy Cook reports.
Take a look at the reservoir levels in Kent and you'll probably already have guessed. Now it's official. Much of the southeast of England is in drought. In the East Midlands, that's been the case for months now. Water levels here worryingly low. And all of this in February, when rain is usually a reliable feature of the forecast. Well, here you get a real sense of how low levels have dropped. This entire area should be covered with water, but as you can see, vast areas of the bank of the reservoir are now exposed. And it's not just a local problem. This picture is repeated across the east and the southeast of England. The reason for all of this is simple. 2 dry winters in a row. Hard to believe if you're watching in Scotland or northwest England, but what they want here is rain, and lots of it.
Well, we need months of torrential rain, to be quite honest. It might not be a popular thing to say, but lots and lots of drizzle persistently over weeks is what we're going to need to get things back to normal. If that doesn't come, and let's be honest, there's no sign of that on the horizon at the moment, there is the very real possibility that we are going to have restrictions.
That brings back memories of the epic drought of 1976, when for many the only water supply was from standpipes. So just how bad are things today? Well, parts of East Anglia and the East Midlands have been in drought since June last year. Now add other regions from Hampshire to Kent, London to Oxfordshire, and as far west as Gloucestershire. For farmers, this is bad news. Lack of rain means they must rely on irrigation to grow their crops. But groundwater and river levels are low. Taking more out now may damage wildlife. And so farmers are calling for a radical solution.
Ultimately, a national grid of water pipe networks, so we can get the water from the wetter west part of the country over to the east and utilise it here. Obviously, that's a major aspiration, but ultimately I think that's what we need.
Severn Trent is one company which is already using pipelines to move water around its region. Today's meeting between ministers and industry leaders will have discussed doing more of this on a national scale. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Warwickshire.
The driver of a school coach which crashed in northern France, killing a teacher from Worcestershire, has been charged with involuntary manslaughter by French magistrates. Police are investigating if Derek Thompson, who's 47, may have fallen asleep at the wheel. The accident happened as he drove pupils and staff from Alvechurch Middle School home from a skiing trip. Police have been given an extra 36 hours to question a man about the murders of a vicar and a pensioner. Stephen Farrow, who's 47, was arrested yesterday in Folkestone. He's being held on suspicion of murdering Reverend John Sardards, who was found dead in South Gloucestershire, and he's being questioned about the death of 77-year-old Betty Yates from Worcestershire. Lloyds Banking Group has decided not to pay out about £2 million in bonuses which had been promised to 13 senior executives. The bank said it was withholding the money because of compensation costs incurred by the group over the mis-selling of payment protection insurance. It's the first time a British bank has withheld bonuses in this way. Our business editor, Robert Peston, reports.
In what bankers think of as the good old days when a bonus was announced, it was the bankers to keep forever. Not anymore. Lloyds has retrieved around £2 million in bonuses awarded a year ago to 13 executives.
Millions of people have been mis-sold payment protection insurance.
The mis-selling of PPI insurance policies is costing Lloyds a staggering £3.2 billion, and those losses are why it wants the bonuses back from executives whom it holds accountable. The biggest bonus loser will be Eric Daniels, the former chief executive, who's losing £580,000 out of a total bonus of just under £1.5 million. 4 other directors are losing between £190,000 and £260,000 each, and a further 8 will be up to £50,000 poorer than they thought they were.
Lloyds have taken the lead and set a precedent for the industry that effectively says if you make a mistake in the past as a bank executive, you can be punished by withdrawing your bonus in the future, and that will change the whole way the industry thinks.
Lloyds caused great distress to many thousands of customers who are unable to make claims on the PPI credit insurance they'd been missold. Now those customers are being compensated, so the question is whether a 40% reduction in the bonus payable to the former chief executive and a 25% reduction in bonuses for 4 other directors, whether that represents adequate punishment.
We've been campaigning to get this to happen since the end of last year. It's good to see this first step. Now, the regulator has got to be much tougher on stopping these rewards for failure, making sure that the banks are clawing back bonuses, whether it's shares or cash, from people that have frankly presided over bad behaviour, bad for customers and bad for us all as taxpayers.
RBS, when led by Fred Goodwin, was also big in the mis-selling of PPI insurance. But although he's recently had his knighthood taken back, he won't have to hand back a bonus because he wasn't paid one in the catastrophic year when he departed. Robert Peston, BBC News.
Coming up on tonight's programme, dish of the day or dangerous development. We speak to the scientist who wants to make burgers from stem cells. Polio, one of the world's most feared diseases, which has been causing paralysis and death for thousands of years, is a step nearer eradication. India once had more cases than any other country, but it's been polio-free for just over a year, and health experts say they have an historic opportunity to eradicate it completely. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh went to Delhi to see an immunisation programme in action.
Just 2 drops is all it takes to prevent polio. Now imagine repeating that 170 million times, tracking down every young child across India, and you begin to get an idea of what it's taken to get rid of polio here. The mark on the finger shows they've received the vaccine.
What's been achieved here is remarkable. India used to have more polio cases than anywhere else, but political will, resources and dedication have finally wiped it out.
The volunteers here are from Britain, members of Rotary, the global network of professionals. Rotary has been at the forefront of the fight against polio for a generation, raising money and awareness.
My dream is to have a polio-free world. We've done it with smallpox, we should be able to do it with polio. We're very close now, so we're on the last days, I hope.
I'm a nurse clinician and I vaccinate babies on a daily basis, and coming here and doing this is just really an extension of that. I love people, and I want to see healthy children worldwide.
This is a shot, so we're lengthening it slowly.
This Delhi hospital still has a backlog of patients paralysed by the virus.
He will have 4 operations.
Mohammed caught polio as a baby. He'll need repeated surgery before he can walk with the aid of calipers.
I get patients from all over. It's painful to see that suffering, painful to see the family suffering, painful to see everyone suffer around that, and painful to see the stigma. If the world can be rid of polio, I think that will be the greatest thing that I can dream of.
Polio used to spread here via contaminated water and raw sewage, but the virus has disappeared because enough people are protected. India has shown global eradication is possible, but the war isn't won yet.
India's polio-free status is under threat. Neighbouring Pakistan, along with Afghanistan and Nigeria, all saw an increase in cases last year, and this virus respects no borders. That's why it's vital mass immunisation campaigns like this continue until every child in every country is protected.
Poorly run immunisation programmes and families who refuse the vaccine are what's preventing those countries from matching India's success. It will take unswerving commitment of the sort seen here if this disabling disease is to be consigned to history. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Delhi.
Eurozone leaders are locked in talks this evening in Brussels to try to secure a deal with Greece, which will allow them to approve a €130 billion bailout package. Our Europe editor Gavin Hewitt is in Brussels for us. Gavin, what's the latest there?
Well, Fiona, all the words going into the meeting were optimistic, and there is still the expectation that a further second massive bailout for Greece will be agreed and the country will avoid bankruptcy. But it's worth being cautious. The finance ministers have been meeting for 8 hours now, and they've been arguing how precisely Greece will reduce its debt burden to the agreed target. They've also been arguing how to ensure that Greece lives up to its commitments to implement new austerity cuts. And one minister, when he came into the meeting, said he wanted to station monitors in Athens to ensure they lived up to their promises. And that, of course, would be highly controversial in Greece. If during the hours of darkness there is a new bailout agreement here, there will be a huge sigh of relief within the Eurozone. But the outcome would be far less certain for Greece, because they will have to implement new austerity measures at a time when the economy is shrinking fast. Fiona.
Gavin Hewitt in Brussels, thank you. The comment by the Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson that striking public sector workers should be taken out and shot did not breach broadcasting rules, according to the TV watchdog Ofcom. Clarkson's remark, made on the BBC's One Show last year, sparked more than 30,000 complaints. Ofcom said that when taken in context, it was clear the comments were not an expression of seriously held beliefs. Now, when is a burger not a burger? Well, you might think if it doesn't contain any meat. But now a Dutch scientist has created a burger grown in a laboratory. He promises it tastes just as good as the real thing. And as our science correspondent Palab Ghosh explains, it has a serious purpose.
This is a strip of muscle grown from stem cells taken from a cow. It'll be used to make the world's first synthetic burger. The strip is one of thousands grown in a lab in the Netherlands. Researchers mix them with layers of fat, also grown in the lab, to make a burger. It will cost more than £200,000 to make. For now, though, the scientists behind the project will have to make do with today's fast food.
My eventual dream is to produce meat that tastes and looks exactly like this, so that you won't be able to distinguish it from the livestock meat. But you know now that it's produced in an environmentally friendly, animal-friendly and resource-friendly way.
Professor Post grows stem cells in a dish, which then clump together and grow into muscle. It's real meat, so it should look and taste like the real thing. Researchers say it's more efficient than farming. Just one animal could make 1 billion burgers, a possibility that's been welcomed by animal welfare groups. But locals at a nearby hot dog restaurant are wary.
I don't think it's a good idea.
Well, why is that?
I just doesn't make sense to me.
There's nothing better than natural meat, and this is how we've been raised our whole lives here. So we know where the farm it comes from. We know who's processing it for us. We know how good it is.
But in the future, natural meat is likely to become too expensive. Buying meat in supermarkets is something that we take for granted nowadays, but not for very much longer, according to some economists. They believe that because of rising demand from India and China, meat prices are set to soar.
We have about 1 billion people that are undernourished on the planet, and as we push towards 9 billion by 2050, we're going to need to produce a lot more food.
Professor Post hopes that the technology he's developing will one day help feed an ever-growing and increasingly hungry world. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Vancouver.
Well, that's it from us. There's more on the BBC News channel, including any developments from the Eurozone ministers' talks in Brussels that we were referring to just earlier. But now we can join our news teams where you are. Bye-bye.